Welcome to our event, The Jews of Summer. What was Yiddish summer camp really like? I'm Rothe Schechter, Yiddish editor of the Forward, and I've been looking forward to this, no pun intended, for weeks. Throughout the 20th century, you may not know that there were a number of secular Yiddish summer camps. There was Kinderwelt, Kindering, Kinderland, Boiberik, and Hemshekh. I imagine a number of you have gone to one of those camps. We're going to focus on just two of them, Camp Boiberik and Camp Hemshekh, because they had a lot of focus on Yiddish, more so than the others. I want to introduce our guests today. First, we have Sandra Fox, who is a visiting assistant professor of Hebrew and Judaic studies at New York University. She just published the book, The Jews of Summer, Summer Camp and Jewish Culture in Postwar America, and is also the founder of the Yiddish language podcast Weiberteich, a feminist podcast in Yiddish, and is on the editorial board of the online journal of Yiddish studies in Geweb. Josh Waletzky is a Yiddish songwriter with 2 CDs of his work, Arriba die Schottens, Crossing the Shadows, and Passagieren, Passengers. His Yiddish songwriting began at Camp Boiberik, where he spent no less than 20 years, beginning in infancy as a staff child of the well-known artist of Yiddish publications, Cyril Waletzky. Just this past Sunday was the world premiere of his full-length song cycle, Pleitim Zusammen, Refugees Together, at the National Yiddish Theater Volksbühne. George Rothe was born in London to refugee parents who fled Hitler in the late 30s. His family settled in the Bronx, where he attended a workman's circle shule and 1 year of Mittelschule. That was the high school for teens. George was at Camp Hemshekh as a camper, then a counselor, then as a kitchen hand from 1963 to 1973. Later, he worked as a project manager for publishing houses and a senior business systems analyst. He has 2 grown daughters, the result of a camp wedding. Yes, sometimes that happened, that campers married each other, and now lives in South Carolina. Joanne Borts is a New York-based performer who appeared in the recent production of Fiddler auf dem Dach in Yiddish. She also writes and directs Kids in Yiddish for the Volksbühne and has performed with Neil Sedaka, Robert Klein, the Closmatics, among many others. Joanne is also a labor activist and elected union leader for Actors Equity Association, which she says was inspired by her years at the Bundist Camp Hemshekh, where she spent 3 summers. Seid begrüßt, welcome to all of you. And I'd like to start with Sandy, with her wonderful book that I'm almost finished reading. And I love the picture on the book because it looks like the bunks that we had where the bunk beds, you know, best friends would sleep one on top of the other so that they can whisper to each other at night. Great image. And I think, Josh, you told me it's from Boiberik, right?
It's from Boiberik, yeah.
Yes, recognize Beth Rosen on the top there.
So Sandy, I wanted to ask you, you did not go to a Yiddish summer camp. You went to Young Judea, a Zionist camp. So when you were researching the book, what made you decide to focus so much on the Yiddish summer camps?
Yeah, I mean, I didn't go to a Yiddish camp, and Boiberik and Hemshekh both didn't exist by the time I was a child. I was born in 1988. Zum bedeuten. I missed that moment in history. It's really, that question really gets to the core of my own kind of Jewish journey and my journey in graduate school with Jewish studies scholarship. So originally I thought I was going to study modern Israeli history, and I kept coming up with projects that really had to do with how American Jews use Israel to find their own identity, or look at Israel and Zionism from a symbolic framework or a cultural framework to draw their own kind of sense of Jewish authenticity. And at some point, my Israel studies advisor, who I was studying with in the beginning of grad school, said, I don't know if this is actually Israel studies or if it's American Jewish history. I said, okay. I think it could have been argued either way. But I started taking classes in American Jewish history with Professor Hasia Diner at NYU, and really fell in love with the field. I had this longstanding interest in studying something about youth groups or youth culture, and was honing in on the idea of studying summer camps, but I really wanted to cast a very wide net. A lot of the research about summer camps up until now has been about one particular camping movement or another, and talking about how utterly unique they are. And of course, there's something unique about every camp. But when I went into the archives, I really saw actually more similarities than differences, even between camps that had extremely different ideologies, like Hebraeus Camp Masad and Hemshekh or Boiberik. There was so much overlap in kind of the shape of everyday life. And so I started to realize that actually the most interesting project would be to put these ideologically, if not opposed, then just different camps into conversation with one another, and really look at how post-war Jews across these ideological, religious, linguistic, and nationalist divides all look to the summer camp as a solution to what they saw as cultural decline, or kind of the decline of Jewish authenticity in the post-World War II period. So my personal interest in Yiddish happened also in that time. I went to Yiddish Farm with your son, Naftali, in 2013, I think. And fell in love with Yiddish and wanted to use Yiddish as a research language. And so, in a way, my background in a Zionist movement and my ability to read Hebrew mixed really well with my becoming a Yiddishist at this particular stage of my life, and allowed me to do this project that I guess is kind of unique in the realm of the study of Jewish education, where you don't really see these things being put into conversation, and you see almost no focus on Yiddish in the post-war period at all.
One of the things that I found fascinating in the book was how you post the administrators, the builders of the camp, who had their ideology, had their agenda that they wanted to transmit to the kids. But ultimately, it was the kids, and especially the counselors, who absorbed part of it and then molded it into what they wanted, into what fit into American society, so that it became kind of like a fusion of what the builders wanted, what the founders wanted, and what made sense for American kids. And Joanne, I'd like to start with you. I assume you may be the youngest here besides Sandy. But I know that you were in Camp Hemshekh in the 1970s. Can you describe what a typical day? I mean, here you're coming, you were not, I believe, from a Yiddish speaking home, right?
No, but my mother was the chair of the Long Island Elementarschule, so there was a lot of Yiddish around, and of course my mother and grandmother spoke to each other in Yiddish. And once I started going to shul, I was like, I can catch that, but it was also heavily dialected, that I had no idea what they were talking about, because Michael Barron taught me,
because he spoke in Litvish Yiddish, right? So what was it like? You wake up in the morning, what was it like?
First of all, Chavashaft, everybody.
Chavashaft means friendship, and this was our slogan.
And from the moment you woke up in the morning, you heard the announcement, Aufmerksam, alle Campers und Aufpasses geht jetzt da rein in Esszimmer fahren breakfast. Frühstück. I was thinking Mittag, but it was breakfast. And so like every morning activity was kind of translated into Yiddish, and for me, I didn't realize how much I was absorbing, even though it was, I came from an English speaking home, but so much was absorbed that it became part of the fabric of the story. And we would do exercises in Yiddish, and we would clean the bunk in Yiddish, and we would giggle.
Well, let's just make it straight. I actually went to Hemshekh for 9 summers. We weren't speaking to each other in Yiddish as we were cleaning up.
No,
most kids did not know Yiddish well enough, or didn't really want to speak Yiddish. But there was a lot of, the activity schedule had Yiddish and English. So it said basketball, and under that it said koishball, netzball, volleyball. Gaga was Gaga.
So everything was translated in terms of what you were doing with your day. So you didn't go to basketball, you went to netzball, and then I actually thought that Gaga was something that everybody made up because it was the funniest game we'd ever played. And it wasn't until my own kids went to camp that I found out that Gaga was a real game.
Josh, what about you? What in Boiberik, what was it like when you woke up in the morning? What made it feel like a Yiddish camp?
Interesting. By the time that I was a camper, I guess in the 50s and 60s, Yiddish was not used as the actual language of communication, even in formal announcements. It was more a case of the camp director, who in my early years was Leibish Lehrer, who was the founder of the camp, and a number of the sort of senior staff people, Fischl Kolko, for example, who was a Jewish culture camp counselor, and the camp mothers and the camp nurse, who actually was for many years Tzipora Schweizman, who was a well-known actress, yes. And they spoke accented English. But the interesting thing was, I'm looking back on it, that these people who spoke in a heavily Yiddish accented English were not looked down upon or made fun of. They were valorized because they were the leaders. So in a funny way, even though Yiddish was not the common spoken language, although many terms were taken into, like Joanne is talking about Hemshekh, that you went to netzball. We went to volleyball, but all of the names that had to do with naming groups, like Jüngste, Älteste, Mittlere.
That means the youngest, oldest. Yeah. We have to translate because not everybody here knows Yiddish.
Yes, I'm sorry. So those names, or within each division, there was the Jüngste, Älteste, Mittlere Älteste, Älteste, Älteste.
It's kind of like freshman, sophomore, junior, and senior, but in Yiddish.
Yeah, exactly. But they were taken into the vocabulary of the English-speaking campers without any, there was no feeling that this is some strange word or anything. This is just what you call it. As Joanne has described.
When you mention about the camp mothers and with the heavy accent, and George, you may have noticed this also when you were a child. I remember going to the canteen after dinner. You could buy whatever candy you wanted, and you would see the camp mothers who had numbers on their arms. And my father was a survivor, but he didn't have a number on his arm. I had never seen anything like that. They had very heavy Yiddish accents. And somebody whispered to me that it was put on them when they were in concentration camp. And it started eliciting a lot of questions by me for my counselor, because I just didn't know what was going on. And like you said, we had respect for these people. We never thought of them that because they had an accent that they were not, true Americans or whatever. For me, these were real camp mothers in the sense of they were nurturing. They were the ones we went to if we were crying, if we were homesick. So George, do you remember having a reaction to seeing these women, like I'm thinking like Rothe Kowarski and others who had numbers on their arms?
Well, of course. And for me as well, that was my first exposure to see that sort of thing, the tattoo on the arm. And that was, I guess, the start of a learning experience of what really happened, how did it happen? And it ended up that many of my friends' parents were survivors from the camps with tattoos. I'm just thinking about Mrs. Barron right now as one of the camp mothers. And to this day, if I see her, I still do this, showing her my fingernails.
Oh, she used to cut your fingernails?
Yeah, so she would inspect. your head and your fingernails, make sure they're clean. So,
Josh, did you have that in Boiberik also? The camp mother would cut your fingernails?
Well, yes and no. When I was in the 1950s, okay, now we'll get to something fun. There was a tradition of a shtoch, we called it, which was all the groups would gather around a campfire, and the older groups had prepared parodies and basically songs that made fun of different camp personalities. And one of the camp mothers' names was Buzzy. So she was Mama Buzzy. And I remember the following verse from one of these songs. Sing of Camp Boiberik, it's a summer paradise. It's on Rhinebeck on the Hudson, and you'll never come back twice. Which, of course, the joke was because everyone came year after year. Take the case of Mama Buzzy, cutting toenails was her joy. Then one day she missed a digit. Now there's one less youngster boy.
Oh my God.
And the song of the Stach was Jeden Shabbos, jede Woche bringen mir a neue Stoch, Stocher her and Stocher hin, but we always keep it clean.
Can you translate that? That's very cute.
Yeah. So Jeden Shabbos, every Shabbos, jede Woche, every week, bringen mir a neue Stoch. We bring another Stoch, making fun of people session. Stocher her and Stocher hin, here a Stoch, there a Stoch. But we always keep it clean.
Right, that's nice. Shtoch actually means like a needle, so it's needling somebody.
Yeah, it's a needling session. Yeah, good translation.
Yeah.
Yeah, so that was sort of the tenor of the way, and lots of Yiddish parodies of American songs. Now these were not commonly sung already in the 1950s, but I remember these from my father, who was a camper in the 30s.
Wow.
So there was something like Romeo liebster, wenn wirst du kommen zu mir auf den Berg, hielt sich verleibischen, nimm mit dein Flashlight, kennst du Chalile, zerbrechen dein Karg. So this is deeply embedded in sneak outs, yeah, which were, I'm sure, common in all.
You mean sneaking
summer
out during
camps.
the night? During the
Yeah,
night?
sneaking out to your boyfriend or girlfriend. Usually it was girlfriend. The boy sneaking out to the girlfriend. There were two areas for the bunks, one for the boys and one for the girls. So it was Boys Hill and Girls Hill. And the girls' hill was taka on a hill, it was up a ways. So the song was Romeo, my beloved, when will you be coming? When will you be coming to me on the hill, on Girls' Hill? Watch out for Leibish, because Leibish Lehrer, who was the founder of the camp, was also the director of the camp. Nimm mit dein flashlight, and take your flashlight with you, because you could, God forbid, break your neck otherwise. So that's the kind of specific Boiberik camp culture that was created in Yiddish. And as the years went on, and there were fewer and fewer Yiddish-speaking kids, or kids that came from Yiddish-speaking families, what remained, as I was saying before, were the names for various things that were specific to Boiberik. And they became part of the everyday language. So, for example, there was a Felker Yontif at the end of the camp season.
It's like a
which
celebration of nations. In Camp Hemshekh, there was Olympiade, like an Olympics, and you had Felkerjontif, which is a
we
little
had
different.
felt
It was not, so it was not competitive. I mean, because
it was,
Olympiade was
yeah,
completely competitive. Okay.
it was not competitive, and that was actually a point of pride for Boiberik kids, that we didn't have a color war at the end of the summer or any kind of competition. It was kind of a color piece, and I would say that the Felkerjontif was the most venerated camp tradition to this day. People talk about it. I know we're not focusing on the values and the ideologies and so forth today, but it was actually very central. And in fact, Leibish Lehrer, who was a sociologist as well as a pedagogue, took a survey. I don't know if Sandy found this in studying, but sometime in the late 60s, I think it was, and asked the campers what was the most important, most popular activity in camp. And the answer, kind of surprisingly, was the Shabbos program. And in my experience, that was true. That was the thing that actually everyone really looked forward to. It was the most important thing. Even among the boys, where athletics was the big, popular thing to do. And of course, camp shows where people got a chance to perform and sing and dance and so forth. But it was Shabbos and the
That's
Felkerjontif
an interesting point to raise about Shabbos, because George, can you explain what Friday night and Shabbos was like in a secular camp like Hemshekh? Obviously, we did not bless the candles or anything like that. So, but it was special, right? Friday night, we did get dressed up in white. We did have chicken noodle soup. Yeah. So, how would you describe Shabbos in Camp Hemshekh?
Yeah, the Friday night dinner was always the same. It was greasy chicken. And usually there was always, every Friday night was a culture night. There was a performance of some kind with a theme. It's usually bilingual.
And usually about something in Yiddish literature, right? Or about socialist fighters or something like that.
Exactly. And it makes me think, we started to talk about it before, was the competitions we had in camp. We said Olympics. And what really surprised me, well, when we had competitions at camp, it wasn't just the athletics, it was a cultural part. And there were requirements for the team. The camp was split into teams. We had some years 3 different competitions, like what we originally called Camp War, but that quickly got changed to Hemshekh. And there it was usually 2 teams, red and blue, and they each represented some literary figure, Shalom Aleichem, Mendele, Peretz, Itzhak Manger. Did have seasons. Okay. Seasons which were commemorating the holidays, not too popular because it didn't have sports. And we had Olympics where the camp was split into, depending on the population, 3 or 4 teams, each representing a country. And the requirements were not only for athletics, but putting on a play about your country and writing original Yiddish and English songs, and also artwork, banners, badges, posters, and all that would be judged by a team of judges. And that was usually at the last week of camp. And I'm just thinking now that we used to have, since nobody ever knew when Olympics was going to be broken, we knew it would be the last week of camp, but no one knew when. It started one year, someone decided to do a fake out. And in the fake out, they made up booklets with all the teams. And I remember on the first fake out, it was maybe 1965. The only thing I remember about it was one of the teams was Pakistan. And during the schedule of events of all the activities, unfortunately, Pakistan could not participate because they were busy facing Mecca to pray.
Facing what?
Facing Mecca so they could pray. So they had a number of these fake outs over the years. I coordinated one that with a group of people that Well, we used imaginary countries from movies. It was Oz, Fredonia from the Marx Brothers, and San Marcos from Woody Allen. And it was a whole routine of how we broke this out before the official Olympics. But what I wanted to say about the original songs is what surprised me is years and years later, the songs that were written specifically for Yada or for Olympics actually became camp classics. And people still sang them 20 years later. And well, even at reunions, people were still singing those songs, which really amazed me.
Yeah.
I would love to also add that not Friday night was white, but Saturday day, we wore blue work shirts and red bandanas, and we explored what it meant to be democratic socialists. And it became part of a Shabbos observance, for lack of a better word, experience, to also study politics and study doing good works. And so to me, Shabbos is always connected to both of those aspects, that Shabbos is about rest and Hemshechisten and Bundische experiences. So so on Saturday morning, when we would do the Chavashaftplatz, first thing in the morning, we would all gather together in a horseshoe, and we would get the news in Yiddish. And if you didn't really know what you were talking about, you would elbow the person next to you and they would explain what was happening. And that was kind of how you would learn. It was a little bit like what it would be like to be raised in a Yiddish speaking household. You just figured it out. And then we would all get together and sing Mir Kommen On. So also, you didn't know it the first day, but by the third day, you were figuring it out. And if you didn't have the words yet, someone would hand you the words and you were learning it, so you could be part of the group. And then, of course, for me, part of what made it so stimulating as a life experience is that the coolest people in camp spoke Yiddish. The coolest people in camp had European-born parents, whether or not their parents were survivors. But these were incredibly smart, incredibly articulate, bilingual people. Why wouldn't you want to be around those people? And so it made all of us want to be better Yiddishists. You know, it was
Good point. Yeah.
right. That's what made it exciting for us. And for me personally, the best thing I did was go to rehearsal all the time. Like, I'm pretty sure I can't remember doing a lot of sports, but they always plucked me and people in my bunk. I had a really talented bunk, and they would plunk me and Shiffy Lovett and Adel Schechter, your sister, and
Harry and Jesse
Harry
Channon.
and Jesse and Sabina and Janie, and they would take us out of class and we would go into rehearsal. And that was like being bombarded with this incredible material, all of this Yiddish, all of this art and culture and song. And we would sing. I mean, I had just come from a performing arts camp where I was a ballerina, and I got 100 times more arts education in Hemshekh, and it was bilingual.
Yeah. And we had to learn the songs by heart, which was really, but it's great because now I know them to this day.
Mhm.
Sandy, another interesting aspect of the book is about Tisha B'Av Ghetto Day. I mean, like the camp that you went to, and many of the Zionist camps stressed the Tisha B'Av. And even though in Hemshekh it was called Ghetto Day, it was around the time of Tisha B'Av, which I didn't realize at the time. But in Boiberik, Leibush Lera was fighting to get Tisha B'Av in when the secular parents didn't want it. So can you explain that a little bit?
Yeah, it's a really, really interesting story, and shows a lot about how Leibush Lera, was trying to take this Yiddish, quote unquote, secular institution and try to shift it to more American Jewish norms of engagement and get kind of religious elements into camp life. So he received a lot of pushback. I saw letters in the archive from parents that said, I don't see why my children should need to be upset about the Holocaust or be involved in these religious rituals. But he believed very strongly that secular Yiddishism would not be enough in America, that there had to be some connection to religion as well, even if it wasn't, halachic Orthodox Judaism, certainly, but, involving ritual was a huge part of camp life at Boiberik, Shabbos rituals and Tisha B'Av included. And I think it's really interesting because there's now like a whole emergent field of research about how secular people create their own rituals, that like ritual is something that lots of people need. And like, what does secular mean actually when everyone kind of wants rituals in their lives? And Lehrer was ahead of the curve on understanding that. And at Hemshekh, they didn't call it Tisha B'Av, and it was different in some ways, but in so many ways, it was almost exactly the same as what a lot of what other Yiddish camps were doing, like Boiberik with their Tisha B'Av, and in some ways even what the Zionist camps were doing, because at the end of the day, Hemshekh Ghetto Day, at least from what I saw in the archives, which I know, everyone who was at camp will have had, other experiences, and archives have lots of silences, lots of things not included. But a lot of the focus was, it was called Ghetto Day for a reason. It was focused a lot on the Warsaw Ghetto uprising and on resistance, which makes a lot of sense because you have this camp with a lot of children whose parents had survived the Holocaust. So first of all, from what I gathered from the archives, that could be for younger campers, the first time they came to understand what their parents had actually gone through, if their parents came from Eastern Europe. And also, the camp focused on heroism, sort of in a way to focus on something besides death merely, and also to kind of give campers a sense of, I guess I want to say pride. It's sort of a problematic pride, right? Because it's based on the idea of not wanting to focus only on Jews as victims, but as if, they had choice. But this idea of fostering pride, and that is really similar in the Zionist camps as well, where you saw, on Tisha B'Av, a focus on Warsaw Ghetto resistance, and then, Jews who were moving to Palestine and later Israel and trying to build a new country. So it's really, and that was one of the most interesting parts of my research. And the sheer amount of paper that all different kinds of camps kept from their Tisha B'Av, or in Hemshekh case, Ghetto Day commemorations, indicates how important leaders thought it was. I mean, you could get into a camp archive and find that, easily 10 to 25% was about Tisha B'Av. So, what leaders left behind says a lot about what they thought was important. And they thought this was very, very important.
Right. George, could you describe what Ghetto Day was like, and especially the performance at night, the program that had narration and songs, so that people know what it was, since it wasn't Tisha B'Av, it was Ghetto Day.
It was commemorating the Warsaw Ghetto uprising in April 1943. It was a very somber weekend. Many parents came up to the camp to participate or to view the production. It was usually, it was also a unique culture night, and we had a ghetto denkmal, a memorial site, and it was usually the Arbeitsstudier, the CITs, counselors in training, who would either build or maintain this denkmal. And then through the weekend, members of the CIT group would stand guard at the denkmal, honoring the 6 million Jews who had perished. The program itself was basically a history lesson on what happened in the Warsaw Ghetto, what happened during the Holocaust. And as I said, it was just a very somber weekend, and people who, for me, it was a terrific learning experience. As a little kid, I knew nothing about that, and seeing it for the first time made a powerful impact on me. And then subsequent years, and there was also, we didn't talk about it, but there was a weekly newspaper in camp. And on Ghetto Weekend, there would be I guess we call a special issue about Warsaw Ghetto, and a special issue with people contributing articles about it. So it was in a way a tough time to live through just the weekend itself, and as I said, very memorable. And I wouldn't say it was a highlight of camp, but it was something that
certainly impacted you.
Sorry?
Certainly impacted you.
That's what I was saying.
I think one of the things that made it so important was that it started the conversation. So you know, as a younger camper, you got to see the CITs, and they were standing guard, and everyone had their time that they stood guard, and there was a changing of the guard. It was very formal. But then when you weren't part of the formal events, you were with your peers trying to figure it out. And it generated a conversation. So it was during Ghetto Week that I found out which one of my bunkmates had parents who were survivors, had parents who were, because these are things that don't come up in conversation normally, but to have young people unafraid to have the conversation and not just have it be something that's told to you from an adult, but that you can experience with your peers, made it even more impactful. And I think that's why everyone who sort of lived through it walked away with a very real understanding, whether or not you were a child of survivors. Like you felt like you were included as part of this story and part of the history going forward.
And I remember the Yiddish songs that I learned on Ghetto Day, beautiful songs that I had not heard at home. One of them was called Ches Yisrolik, my name is Yisrolik. I'll just sing you the chorus. Ches Yisrolik, ich bin das Kind vom Ghetto. Ches Yisrolik, a heftige Jung. Hodge verblieben, dole netto, der lang ich als noch a Swiss-Jonasung. So what he's saying is, here I am, I'm the child of the ghetto. I'm selling cigarettes and saccharine for a living because I lost both of my parents. And then he goes on to the song saying, but, you know, I've got a lot of, oomph, and if anybody tries to make fun of me, I'm going to show him who he is, so it was the beautiful melodies and the words. And I remember during the program and standing at the Denkmo in the night, it was at night, there were torches that we had to walk under to get there. And when we got there, I believe there were 6 flames burning on the ground. And as we just stood there silently looking at that beautiful Daniel Liebeskin's beautiful mosaic that he did of a partisan fighter, and you just heard people crying all around you. And I remember going back to the bunks, and even after lights out, we just kept talking about it. And it really had impact. But then the next day, it was back to Netzbol and Koishbol. It wasn't like it got us down and that was the end of the summer. And I remember that's when we started kind of focusing on the end is coming, the end of camp, and we're going to have to say goodbye to our friends. And we had this big banquet at the end that everybody was looking forward to, and made sure on visiting day to have our parents send up our really nice dresses so that we could look really cool at the banquet. And food was really good. It was the only time of the summer that we didn't have camp food. So Josh, did you have something like that in Boiberik?
Not exactly, no, not a banquet like that, but we did have the Felkejantef was the grand finale that in fact if someone was trying to figure out if they were going to leave camp early for one reason or another, the expression was, "You're going to call it an early Felka." But there was another tradition in Boiberik called matonis, means gifts, and each group would figure out something that they could make and leave behind for the following summers. Like one year, my bunk got together with our brother bunk, and we actually constructed a dugout on the playing field. And people, it was a real kind of community builder, because you were leaving something behind. And of course, there was a song about it that said, "Gut zu lassen unser Sinnen als wir haben da gelebt." Good to leave a sign that.
So what I want to
lived
ask
here.
you, did the dugout actually get a sign on top of it so that the next summer everybody knows that that particular bunk had built that
Uh,
dugout?
yeah, I think there was, but that wasn't really the point,
That
you
was the
know,
point.
of identifying.
Right.
It's probably on the back or something. But
That's
no, but yeah, you could go around the camp and actually see different things that have been made by former, you know, in former summers by other people. But yeah, the sense of that Joanne was talking about of being together with your community, your peers, and fashioning a sense of identity and Jewish identity linked to the larger Jewish communities, but also a very tight-knit and very positive sense of Jewish identity. I think, and the Matanis was part of that. You know, it's just like something you wanted to give.
It's a very nice tradition.
You know.
What about visiting day? You remember what visiting day was like? I mean, we in Camp Hemshekh, on the first visiting day, we had a campers play where campers put on the entire play in Yiddish. And then in the second visiting day in August, it was the counselors play, which was like really well performed. I mean, these were semi-adults. Now that I think back at it, I'm wondering about those parents who didn't know Yiddish, how they were able to follow the plot, but maybe they were just so happy to see their child on stage that it didn't really matter. So anybody, George or Joanne, you want to share what visiting day was like for you?
Well, for me, the first day of camp, I was plucked out of the room and they put me into die Kishef machen, and I
It's
played
That's Goldfaden's play, The Sorceress. Yeah.
and I played Baba Yachna, who was the Wicked Witch, and Rock Rosenfeld put me, oh, I might even have a picture. Hold on. Rock Rosenfeld put a fake nose on me and dressed me as Baba Yachna, the evil witch. And it didn't ruin me, right? Dressing up as the ugly witch didn't make me feel bad. It made me feel awesome. And my parents came up and they brought our little doggy with them, and I got to dress up and, you know, live my best life as Baba Yachna.
Yeah.
And yeah, that was visiting day for me. And my little brother, when he came to camp a couple years later, everyone, they just wanted to participate. It was all about, you know, you're putting on your performance for your parents, and it never, I mean, not for me, it didn't feel like work, or it didn't feel like you were being trotted out and like a dog and pony show. It felt like, hey, this is what we learned this summer so far. So anyway,
I also remember it being very inclusive. And in other words, anybody could be a part of the campers play, even if they were just an extra in the chorus. You still got to be up there. You still had to wear a certain costume, you know, and feel like a part of the team. So George, what was visiting day like for you?
Yeah, I'm remembering as a camper, waiting impatiently for my mother to show up. Because part of visiting day was, people were bringing goodies. People were bringing junk food, right? So that was something to look forward to.
Except my parents, they were the only ones who bought apples. And I was so jealous that other people got brownies and Tootsie Rolls and I was getting apples. Yeah.
Another feature of visiting day is that you could leave camp with your parents.
Right.
And maybe go out to eat or go sightseeing, do something like that. I can remember one year going with, with Ruth Stark and Harvey Fainer and Harvey Freed. Their parents, Freed's parents, took us out and we went to Howe Caverns for the day. So it was like a field trip, but a small one. But it was one of the features of visiting day to leave camp. I was just thinking about, as far as plays go, we performed Rothe. Is that what it was?
That's Mendele's play, yeah.
Yeah.
So that was a counselor's play, right?
It was the counselor's play, 72, I think. Yeah. So visiting day was always special, and there were 2 visiting days a year, as you said. And for some reason, after visiting day, camp was very loud from all the junk food.
That's right. Josh, what was
Um,
visiting day like in Boiberik? Was there also two of them, one per month?
There were two of them, and they were not the same kind of presentations or all camp events. They were really for each kid to be with their parents and go off and have some private time. But one thing maybe worth mentioning is that Boiberik had an adult side, what we call the guest side, that ran all summer long. It was particularly active on the weekends when families could get away. But it was a whole parallel program, cultural program in particular, and the guest theater was a great institution. I mean, you
I mean,
had
you had real actors coming up there?
yes, who were there all summer. David Ellen, for example, whose son was in my bunk as a kid, was there all summer, and Schifferler and Ben Bonus were up there a lot. The real stars of the Yiddish theater were performing every week at camp.
And
And
you said Sephora Speisman, the actress, was the
Sephora
camp nurse.
Speisman,
So did she,
yeah.
if she was the camp nurse in the infirmary, did she have a chance to perform in those plays? Probably not.
I don't think so, but of course the thing I always remember about Sephora Speisman, she said, among the nurses, I'm the best actress, and among the actresses, I'm the best nurse. That was, but no, it was. I mean, I remember first hearing the Megillah Lieder.
It's by Itzik Manga.
Yeah, Manga's lead, Megillah Lieder, walking past. And then I just stopped and went in and heard it for the first time. They were really top notch, and it was a very important part of the cultural life. In addition, there was something called Unter dem Baum, under the tree, where under some big, huge tree, they set up a microphone and had guest speakers frequently. And really the top people, we had Basheva Singer came and gave a reading. During the course of which my mother painted a spontaneous mural, because she was the art person for the guest side, for the adults. So there was a real vibrant, older, generation life, cultural life going on at the same time in parallel. And it was, yeah, so there was sort of two wings to Boiberik.
Yeah, Rachel, were you in camp when Itzik Manga came to camp?
I was there in 65, and then I was bullied, so I didn't go back for 2 summers. And I came back in 68 to give it another chance, and I was much happier. We haven't talked about bullying, but that happens to be a fact of life in camp, even the nicest camps. So when was Itzik Manga there? When did he visit?
Name one summer. I don't remember what year it was, but he did come and we put on a special performance for him.
Wow.
And, I'm thinking it was written
I
up.
thought it was Shalom Secunda, but you're talking about something earlier than that.
Oh, you might be right. You're right.
Okay, yeah, sure. I remember Shalom Secunda came and we did a whole Secunda evening with Donna and By Mia Bista Shane, right? Did he write the music to By Mia Bista Shane? No?
Very possible. I don't know.
I know he did Donna. He did a whole series of, even one that I never heard before. Mir kommen von Passaic, mir seien sehr fähig, chitty bam 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 bam. I don't know where they got this from. Some theater ditty. That was Shalom Secunda, yes, and in fact, the Forvitz wrote a whole article about his coming there to Hemshekh and what it was like.
Yeah, I remember there was a bit of negotiation going on.
Yeah, I think because his wife didn't want him to go or something, there was a reason why he wasn't going to, and he called up, he said, I'm really sorry, I can't make it. And I think it was Zalman who wrote him back. He said, you can't do this. The children have been performing for weeks. You can't let them down. And he came a bit late. I remember we were all standing on the stage ready. and we were waiting. The big chair was sitting in the front, waiting for him, like a royalty that was going to come and sit on the throne. And he came about, I think it was about 25 minutes late, but he came, and it was a great evening. And you could just see the nachas on his face, seeing all these American kids singing his songs. That was
I also remember when Emil Gorovitz came. He was escaped from the Soviet Union, and he came and sang all of these Verbotene Lieder. And I also remember that Phyllis Burke, Adam Burke's mom's, she was teaching us all of these Verbotene Lieder, also under the Milchbäum. So we would know these songs before Gorovitz came.
Right.
So, and that was a big deal. He was pretty awesome.
I'm actually looking, we're coming closer to the end, and I just want to bring in some questions. Howard Voss Altman asks, was there a clear socialist Bundist agenda at Hemshekh? And if so, how was the ideology expressed during camp programs and activities? So which of the Hemshechisten would like to answer?
When he said that, my very first thought was visiting day and the counselor fund, where all tips were pooled and then distributed evenly among the staff.
That's right.
That's one example there.
That's unlike any other camp I'd ever known, that we pooled our tips and then we spread it equally to everybody.
I also remember that I heard the words, it's not the money, it's the principle, all the time. And I mean, I personally came home singing all of these awesome songs about red flags. And my father was working for the government, and he was like, yes, those are fantastic songs. You'll sing them in the house, because it was still the middle of the Cold War. It was still a lot of Red Scare going on. So it was part of it. And I remember we had a culture night about Salvador Allende and Chile, and we sang all of these songs. I'm sure Moish Russ is on the line here, and he remembers. We learned about other cultures that were dealing with political strife, and it was very interesting, although very decidedly democratic socialism, not communism and not Stalinism. It was very much an American concept of democratic socialism. And
it was very, very anti-communist, actually.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So Mark and Marcia Straczynski ask, was the Partizana Yiddish song known to the kids or the parents? Sag nicht keinmal, als du gehst im letzten Weg. Vodan, right? Of course, everybody knew that. Everybody stood up for that. I mean, today when I see, I go to Yom HaShoah events, if they sing Sag nicht keinmal, or even if they sing it in Hebrew, they don't always stand, which is shocking to me. Like, at least have the narrator say, please rise. Because it was unheard of that you would stay seated when you had survivors around you. I mean, this was their hymn. So do you remember having that experience?
Of course.
Yeah.
I was thinking in Kindering, Ruth Barron also brought, I guess, Ghetto Night to the Kindering audience or population. And again, of course, it included Sag nicht keinmal. And, I went one time to see it in Kindering, and it was very moving. She did a great job.
And
Josh, you wanted to say, I think Josh wanted to say.
I just wanted to add one thing, that there was actually contact among the three camps that we're mentioning. And it was a great highlight for the Boiberik kids to have Hemshekh visit us and bring one of their camp productions. And then I think it was the following summer, we brought one of our productions to Camp Hemshekh. And it really, in terms of like identity building, this was a huge identity builder, because it's like, oh, we're not the only crazy little summer camp that speaks some Yiddish, and here's another whole camp that does it.
And
whereas
we
with
the same
Kindering, and we knew some of the same songs, so it was like, yeah, it was a big, because there was this feeling that we're a little bubble here in Boiberik, which of course was quite true. But to know there was another bubble really strengthen that sense of identity.
That's true. I mean, I remember, I think we all went to public school, and for me, being among non-Jewish friends, coming to Camp Hemshekh was like so different. I could be myself. And also the other thing I remember as a preteen, that we didn't wear makeup. They said any girl who in school, we were putting on makeup already, but in camp, you were not allowed to wear makeup. That was like a big no-no. It was considered very jappy. And it was like, oh, this is great. I don't have to pretend. I don't have to try to be, look like some model or something. I could just be myself. And I think that's a good point of what you're saying, of having these two Yiddish-minded camps come together and see we're not all alone, that there's a different camp just like us.
I think it's important to also mention that when you put campers and counselors and boys and girls in the same place at the same time, there's the kissing rock, there's, we did, I mean, I did my share of misbehaving, like little misbehaving, and you got in a really safe environment. Like my parents sent me to Yiddish camp and they thought, oh, she's going to be absent. And I got into probably more trouble in camp than I ever did in school, but good trouble. And I'm sure that my very first kiss was in front of Beidel Vov, and who I'm not going to say who I kissed, but I still talk to him, and we would sit there and we would smooch, and then he would say, oh, nicht heint, ich hab a Kopfwehtig.
Really? He would say that in Yiddish?
Yeah, we all thought that was the funniest thing. And we kind of talked about, what would your parents say? Oh, nicht heint, ich hab a Kopfwehtig. But yeah, it was part of the story, and because I think all camps are about, raging hormones and experiencing each other in a really safe environment. So it had to be said.
That's a whole other chapter. This would require a new Zoom event. I hope you all enjoyed coming here as much as I did. I think this was really fascinating to see what Yiddish summer camp was like. I hope the rest of you had a good time listening to us. And as we say in Yiddish, seid gesinnt und nur auf Simchas. Let's see each other only in good times.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you, Sandra. Thank you, Rachel. Thank you, Forwitz.
Ashenim Dank.